Alex McRae said, I'd assume that you generally get the green light for your ideas these days, but when you were starting out, did you ever feel a bit disillusioned at times? If so, what did you do about it? No, first of all, it is not necessarily correct to say that people just say, oh yes, it's Dan, he can do whatever he likes. So I have to jump through hoops, I have to make sure things get approved, I have to, ask politely and put in submissions and pitches and that kind of stuff like anybody else. Particularly when you're working in other people's universes, you have to do all those things properly. Yes, inevitably it was harder to land commissions when I was starting out than it is now. That is true of all writers. You've got to build up a momentum, and sometimes it can feel really dispiriting that you keep going back, whether you're trying to find a publisher or whether you're trying to find an agent or whatever it is you're doing, you may have to knock on an enormous number of doors before you get anywhere. And I'm afraid the only answer to that is perseverance. It's actually I have to say easier these days because of the advent of the internet and emails to approach agents and to approach publishers. Still doesn't take a long time and an awful lot of metaphorical shoe leather. You've just simply got to keep going at it. If you want to do it, you've simply got to keep going at it. There's no magic bullet, there's no shortcut, there's nothing like that. And that's what I did. I kept going. Greg also asks, was it a different challenge again writing audio dramas, or was it similar to the process of writing a screenplay? Yes, it was a different challenge. Screenplays, I think, weirdly are a world apart. I've written audio dramas before. I've written Doctor Who and Torchwood, quite a lot of Doctor Who ones and Torchwood ones. Now working in Black Library ones, which is great fun to do. Writing an audio drama, weirdly, is more like writing a comic, I find, than anything else. And writing comics is something I'm very, very comfortable with and very, very, very much enjoy doing. You'd think writing a screenplay would be more like writing a comic because it's words and images, but it's not. There are other things going on there. Screenplays are very interesting, but they're an oddly dissatisfying thing to do sometimes because you are at such a vast remove from what the end product's going to be. A much vaster remove than, say, writing a novel, where the only sort of interface between filter between what I'm doing and what ends up on the page is the sterling work of editors and proofreaders. Or a comic where the only filters from the original story are the work of the artist and the inker and the letterer and the editor getting to the end product. With a movie, what you write goes through so many filters, inevitably. Actors, cameramen, animators, whatever it is, and there's so many different things that happen to what you originally write that the distance is sometimes sort of overwhelming, I think. So with an audio, it's not like that. You write a script, the editor gets his teeth into it, and then it goes to the actors produce it. It's fantastic. The big difference, obviously, and this is so obvious, I apologise, but the big difference with an audio drama is because there are no pictures. So you've got to develop a knack of being able to put the pictures in without too much of an appearance of the Right Honourable Basil exposition. And that's something I discovered in the early Doctor Who ones I did for Big Finish, which I enjoyed doing very, very much indeed, is that you really got to develop ways of communicating what's going on without having people stating the bleeding obvious. Once you can do that with some confidence, they are great to do, and Black Library, particularly the Inquisitor stuff, lends itself to that narrative voice, so that's good. Mark at Red Dwarf 6 asks, do you have any preferences between novels, television or comic strip writing? I do. This touches on something I mentioned earlier. My favourite thing to write are novels. Prose fiction. I also love writing comic strips because I've been doing it for a long time, and the format does not form a barrier for me. I can just write it with I just basically don't think about how I'm having to structure it because I've done it enough times. Writing for screenplays and stuff like that, there is because I don't do it as much, there is a much greater sense of making sure I'm doing it right, which I don't necessarily think stifles creativity or anything, but feels sometimes like it is, because you're worried more about making sure you're setting it out properly and constructing it in terms of what a screenplay needs to be constructed. My favourite thing to do, however, is writing novels because as I said just now, that's the closest thing to talking directly to a reader. Lewis Osborne Stockton asks, what was it like selling your first novel? It was great. I felt very, very satisfied, except it sort of happened before I realised it. I've been writing comics for a long time, and I'd written novels that had not been published and sold. I hadn't tried terribly hard because I've been concentrating on comics. And then I was working for Black Library, and they asked me if I wanted to write a novel for them. And so it was sort of done and dusted. It was commissioned and sold before I'd even written it, and it was a great achievement, a great personal achievement. It was sort of more satisfying actually to finish writing it so I could then deliver it. Then when I published Triumph, Angry Robot, which must have been in the late 20s or early 30s of the books that I've written. I've just finished my 40th. Because that was an original novel, although the distinction is minor as far as I'm concerned, it still was a huge achievement. In fact, the greatest satisfaction I've ever had, I suppose, like that, was writing and publishing a very, very short story called Point of Contact, which appeared in one of the Solaris science fiction anthologies. A little story, I just had this idea, and I sat down and wrote it down without even thinking about what I would do with it, and I submitted it and they published it. And there was an immense amount of satisfaction about the idea that it was just happened, and I put it in and it worked. But yes, it's always satisfying to do a job and to finish a job and to deliver a job and see it in print and that kind of stuff. Andrew asks, is writing fiction a way that helps you develop an understanding of reality through another more exotic lens and express your understanding of people and how they work? Goodness, I suppose it is. That's a good question. I couldn't have put it better myself. I don't sit down in the morning and go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write some fiction that's going to help me develop an understanding of reality through a more exotic lens and express my understanding of people and how they work in the form of shooty death, kill in space. I don't do that, but I think it inevitably does, because it's one thing writing Baltapol, but I like to write about people, and the only people that I know to write about are people that I know, I suppose, and so therefore, yes, there is reality informs what I write. Steve Hodgson, hello Steve. How do you keep track of your universes to maintain consistency, continuity? Huge pieces of paper, annotated maps, many notebooks, computer documents, great memory, or all or none of the above? All of the above, really. Downstairs in my office I have got notebooks, I've got clipboards covered in stuff. I tend to use a lot of post-it notes, which I range over my desk as I'm working and move them around and then screw them up as I deal with plot points. I actually use the backs of envelopes. I don't know why, but it's not a deliberate effort to save paper. But I get mail and I take the mail out of it, instead of throwing the envelope away before it gets recycled. I use them as note things, and then end up sellotaping them into notebooks and stuff like that. So there's huge amounts of paperwork. I've got a big write-on, wipe-off board. I've got all sorts of other stuff. So all of that. My memory can be very good. It's jumping really from one project to another that you've got to work very hard at. So I have to get myself into a mindset, which is why each book has its own, each novel or each novel series has its own sort of notebook, a sort of resource that I go back to. I sort of get the Horus Heresy file out and I go back to those bits of paper. But I make notes, notoriously make notes all the time in my handy black notebook, and then take out of that ideas that if I've written Gaunt Ghost ideas in those, then the Gaunt Ghost ideas go into a Gaunt Ghost file and that kind of stuff, just to keep track of them. I also have for Gaunt Ghost, for instance, a regimental map of who's alive and who's dead and where they are and what squads they belong to, which gets altered and manipulated and adjusted every novel. So what are your primary inspirations when writing? It can't just be the money. What drives Dan Abnett? Goodness. You're right. It can't just be the money and the private jet and the house in the Maldives and all that. It can't just be that. I really love writing. I really, really love writing. If I wasn't writing for a living, I would be writing for my own pleasure anyway. And I'm lucky enough to have ended up doing something that I like that much. My inspirations come from everywhere around me. What I read, and I don't just mean other novels or other work by other people, but but non-fiction, journalism, world events, history, everything. Everything goes into some kind of weird processing machine in my head and comes out with ideas that I then turn into the stories that I want to write. So, yes, I think I think the simple way of looking at it, if I was just writing for the money, for a start, writing is not going to, unless you're J.K. Rowling, writing is not going to make you very, very rich indeed. It's something you're always going to do for the love of it. But if I was just writing for the money, I think I'd have run out of steam by now, because that becomes a very mechanical process. I write because I want to write the stories. Adam Williamson, what advice would you give a first-time writer? Read and write. I'm so sorry that the advice type answers tend to get really, really trite. It's not because I've been asked them a lot before, which I have, but they do boil down to the very simple advice, is that if you're going to write, you really need to read. Not for any other reason than to experience the written word. If nothing else, to work out what you don't want to do. Reading is inspirational anyway, and you need to write. If you want to be a writer, you've got to write lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff, and just sort of hone those talents. Get people to read it. Don't be offended by their commentary. In fact, people don't like stuff. Listen to their criticisms. Work out why they don't like it. Because if you're going to be a writer, you want an audience. You want readers. So you need to please readers. So find out what pleases people and what doesn't. Keep a notebook. Keep notes. Because ideas that you have, write them down when you have them, because you never know when they're going to go and not be there when you actually need them. And I think it's worth remembering and there's a technical term for this theory. Malcolm Gladwell talks about it, but it was not a theory original to him. I can't remember. It's the something or other principle. But he reckons that to do anything really, really, really well, you've got to work at it for sort of 10,000 hours, sort of an apprenticeship of 10,000 hours, which can be sort of just, sort of stuff you do as a kid and a teenager, developing those muscles, whatever it's going to be, a singer, a writer, chairman of the International Monetary Fund, whatever it is, you've got to build up 10,000 hours worth of experience. He cites the example of Mozart, for instance, who started very, very young composing, and sort of by the time he was really hitting his stride, he'd got those 10,000 hours. He cites the Beatles, who were in Hamburg for years playing in bars before they suddenly, out of nowhere, became this huge hit. So you've got to expect to put in some hard work, I think. Really, it's practice. Karen Warren, goodness. Hello, Karen. Are you motivated every day to write, or are some days tougher than others? Some days are tougher than others. Mondays. I am motivated. However, I mean, I've got a strange motivation to write. I think that goes back to the question earlier on about whether I'd be doing it anyway, and I would be doing it anyway. So I'm sort of motivated every day to write. Some days I'm so motivated I can't stop myself. Some days it's my job, and I get up and I know things have to be done. I just get on with it, and I quickly get myself back into the groove and do it. Other days I can sort of barely wait to get to my desk. I think that's inevitable. Anybody, even people who absolutely, like myself, who absolutely, and I'm sure Karen as well, who absolutely do something they love doing, some days it's more of a struggle than others. And I think one of the assets that I found is that because I did quite a lot of, as it were, commercial writing, that is to say time fiction, writing comics and stuff like that, where there are fairly rapid deadlines, or it's not just slaving away in your garden shed and writing a novel that you will one day publish, but it is an ongoing process of work. Helps keep you on that track. You just, I can't argue with the fact that somebody needs a book next week or somebody needs a comic next week. It's just, the commissions keep you going, rather than sort of losing weeks or months to some sort of struggle to find your muse. It sort of keeps it on a kind of a sensible level. Karen asks, do you visualise your characters before you begin the story, or do they emerge as you write? I'd love to know what Karen's answer to that is, because Karen, of course, is a fabulous writer. She's written some splendid books that I would urge anybody to go and look at. Slights, Walking the Tree, Mystification. Slights is a fantastic place to start. Really would urge people to go and seek that out. So I'd love to know what her answer to that question is. I do visualise a lot of characters before I begin a story. I have a very clear idea of planned characters. I know what role they've got to play, and therefore I know what sort of people they're going to be. sometimes they take on a life of their own that I'm not expecting. Sometimes I write a minor character in, and because they've got an interesting name or whatever, they'll suddenly start to turn into something much more interesting than I was anticipating. And sometimes characters that I've been writing for a while will suddenly show a facet that I hadn't thought of and turn into something. And sometimes I visualise a character for a particular purpose, and when I come to write it, I realise that for whatever reason it doesn't work, and I have to sort of recast. I have to go back and say, no, you know, I'm sorry. Thanks for coming in, but you're not what we were looking for. We were looking for somebody taller or whatever. And they change in that sort of way. Karen also asks, what story experienced the highest number of drafts? I don't know, because I don't keep tally of drafts in that way, because I constantly revising things. Revision on a daily. I don't write and then go back and revise and then go back and revise. You know, I don't sort of do it like that. I go through polishing on a daily basis. Part of my routine as I start doing something is to go back and look at what I've done the day before and revise it. So yes, I revise as I go along. So I don't have a book that I go, oh yes, that went through 14 different drafts. The obvious answer to that question is that there's one book, Honour Guard, which is the fourth Gaunt's Ghost book, that went through 2 distinct drafts because I lost the first one. I had to write it again from scratch. I think that's all to do with people's process. I'd be very interested to talk to somebody who actually sort of has that process of writing a draft and then that being a separate entity and then coming back and producing draft 2 and that kind of stuff. So that's not how I've ever written. And not to suggest for a moment that I just bang things out and expect that to work, because there is an enormous amount of finessing goes on as the story grows. It's probably worth pointing out that you can friend me on Facebook if you wanted to, at Dan Abnett Primary Clone. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Abnett Club. That's all one word, Dan Abnett Club. Or for a more casual approach, you can follow me and Nick on Twitter at Vincent Abnett, all one word. And my blog is at danabnett.com, which I'm sure many of you who've asked me questions already know. Thank you for all the questions. I look forward to talking to you again.